Welcome to the Ultimate Landscape CEO podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Katz, and today I'm joined by Nate Moses, founder and CEO of Precision Landscape Management in Greenville, South Carolina. Precision focuses on high-end residential clients and offers a full mix of services: design build, maintenance, lawn care, irrigation, and more. With two branches, Nate and his team are on track to generate $10.5 million in revenue this year, up from 8.4 million last year and just 3.5 million a few years ago. Nate shares how he started the business with nothing more than a Honda Accord and a push mower, and what it took to grow from a side hustle into a multi-million-dollar company. He's candid about early missteps with delegation, how a lack of clarity in roles cost him a key employee, and what he does differently today to set his team up for success. We also get into his journey with self-awareness, including tough feedback he received in a peer group that reshaped how he shows up as a leader. Nate explains how he's learned to invite feedback, build trust with his team, and keep communication clear, even when it's uncomfortable. On top of that, we discuss acquisitions. He's completed 5 or 6 to date, including one that doubled the size of his business, and the lessons he's taken from each. And Nate talks about how learning financial literacy gave him the clarity and confidence to lead Precision into its next chapter. This conversation is full of practical lessons and hard-earned insights. You're going to love it. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Ultimate Landscape CEO podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Katz, and my guest today is Nate Moses. Nate, thanks for joining us.
Mitch, it's an honor to be here.
So let's dive right in. Why don't you give us a longer introduction of yourself? Tell us about yourself, your business, where you are, service mix.
Sure thing. So my name is Nate Moses. I'm the founder and CEO of Precision Landscape Management. We're based in Greenville, South Carolina. We primarily service high-end residential homeowners, and our service mix is pretty broad, as we may get into a little bit later on. We do anything from design, build, maintenance, lawn care, irrigation service, etc. And all of that is for residential homes in the upstate of South Carolina.
And so you have 2 branches?
That's correct. In the upstate here is Greenville, South Carolina, which is kind of a smaller, mid-sized city. And then not too far away is a pretty popular, there's actually a series of lakes, but there's one lake in the middle where there's a lot of high-end homes. When I say a lot, we're talking several thousand high-end homes on a lake. And so those are all, obviously they need service. And the closest town is Seneca, South Carolina. And it's a pretty small town. And so there's obviously a lot of demand for our work in that area. And so about 3 years ago, we made the decision to have a second location there.
And you told us your revenue mix or your service mix. What was your total revenue last year, and what are you set to do this year?
Yep, great. So last year in 2024, we did about 8.4 million in revenue. And this year we're projected to do 10.5 million in total revenue.
Do you have a target for next year yet?
Not defined. My guess is it'll be in the 12 range. But pretty soon as a leadership team, we'll meet and determine that.
So 8.4 last year, budget 10.5 this year. What was 2023?
2023 was 7.5 million.
So pretty fast growing company.
Yeah, and the year before that was 3.5 million. So going from 3.5 to 10.5 in 3-4 years, that's it's been quite the journey.
Yeah, you've learned a lot through that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so, and I remember last year when we rolled out our new benchmark, the Profit Growth Index, and we highlighted the top 5. You were in the top 5 with that significant growth.
Yeah, it was a proud moment. I was not expecting that, so to be recognized for that from the stage was pretty cool.
Yeah. So, and what got you into the green industry? What made you start your business?
Yeah, so if we go all the way back to when I was a kid. I mean, I grew up in a relatively poor family. I mean, we always had our basic needs met, but I found out at the age of, I don't know, 9 or 10 that if I wanted some money to buy something, I had to work for it. And so even at a young age, I was doing little things to earn a little bit of money. And so one of the things, as I got probably about 12 years old, one of the things I could do is cut grass. And so that's just sort of familiarized me with the landscape industry. And so I would do that in the summers as a high school student and just pick up some extra bucks. And so that's kind of what introduced me to the industry. I went to school for a couple of years pursuing some other interests and ultimately ended up coming back to the landscape industry in 2007, 2008, and which was a tough time for many who were in all different industries during the Great Recession. And but that's where Precision was founded out of.
Nice. What did you start going to school for?
Went to school, ironically, for pre-physical therapy, which is basically like pre-med. And it turns out you have to be really, really good at biology and chemistry. And I did not like studying books so much.
Who does? Well, I guess some people do, but not many, I feel like.
Found out pretty quickly that was not going to work out for me.
Yeah, gotcha. And so you got into mowing grass. You started your business, and so what's the the evolution? Take us through the first few years, and maybe up to the first big. Oh crap! This is a real business.
Yeah. Oh man. So lots of things I learned along the way. I feel like my story is not super unique, but maybe it is. I've lived it. Nobody else has. So I'll just kind of go through some of the beginnings. I didn't actually have a truck when I first started cutting grass as an adult and starting the company. All I had was a four-door Honda Accord. And it was champagne color. I want to say it was a 95 Honda Accord. I would just fold down the back seat, open the trunk, and lift push mower into the back and put in the blower and the string trimmer. And I don't know, I had probably 2 or 3 clients when this is happening. And pretty quickly it was like, well, I'm going to need a truck and a trailer. But I probably side hustled that while I was working a full-time job for probably 6 to 12 months. I can't remember the exact time frame, but pretty humble beginnings, just starting with what I had. And once I realized that, it could be more than a side hustle, obviously bought a truck, trailer, incorporated the business, all of that. After a couple years of it being like an evening weekends thing, obviously quit my full-time job and went full-time with it in 2009, had just gotten married. And so that was a big risk. Had no idea what I was doing in terms of business, right? All I really knew was how to engage customers and try to help them get their needs met. Knew a little bit about grass and landscaping, but probably not what somebody coming out of horticulture school or who was maybe raised through a legitimate business would understand. And so a lot of that was just kind of learning things by trial. And I'd say the thing that allowed us to kind of go from a side hustle to $1 million in revenue over about 6-year period was just being willing to learn whatever I needed to learn. If I didn't have the answer, I'd go find it out. I'd ask questions of other people. I'd try to research it on the internet, which was a budding thing at those days. And so about 2015, 2016, we hit some pretty big growth spurts, going from 2015 was about $500,000 in revenue, and 2016 we did $1 million in revenue. And that was when I learned that I had to figure out how to actually run a business or scale it way, way back. And so I'd say that's those first 5-6 years, it was kind of all about the trade and all about just doing landscaping and doing landscaping well. And 2016 is where I discovered that I needed to actually learn how to run and lead a business.
What steps did you take, or what was the first step you took to do that?
Oh man, so 2016, as I said, it was a pretty tough year, lots of growth, and we weren't really making money. And I remember getting to the end of busy season, it was probably August, September, and I was kind of facing what had become for the last couple of years. Do I continue doing this decision? I kind of get burnt out a little bit by the end of busy season, had taken vacation, that kind of thing. And so I talked to my wife, should I keep doing this or should I scale it back, kind of thing? And she was always encouraging and, um, kept reminding me what the bigger picture was. But to be honest, I didn't really know what the bigger picture was. And so a friend suggested I go to a conference. And so at that time, GIE Expo and Elevate were together in Louisville typically in October, I believe. And so had the opportunity to go there, and my eyes were open to how large the industry really was. And I was able to sit in some speaking sessions where I was really inspired to go to the next level with this. And I had no idea what that meant. And my wife probably remembers me calling her after probably about a day of being there and just saying, I have no idea why I'm saying this, but I need to dive in with both feet and figure out what is going on with this industry. It's huge, it's booming. This world is way bigger than I imagined it was, and I have no idea what this is calling me to, but I have to follow it. I have to continue diving in and figuring out what this industry is all about, and that's kind of where it started.
And so as you scaled quickly, right, going from that 500,000 to a million, I'm imagining you brought on your first few employees. And so
Mhm.
tell me about that experience and what you learned from that.
Yeah, bringing on employees is something that I was always pretty passionate about. Even in my first year in business, I had a friend who's a couple of years younger than me, but we enjoyed working together, hanging out, that kind of thing. And so he came alongside the business as it was growing. He started out as a part-time employee and ended up working in the business for about 5 years. And I really enjoyed the training, the teaching, the I learned this, now let me help you learn this. And then when you see the light go on in their eyes, like, oh, I got it. This is why we do what we do. That was always a really fulfilling thing for me. And so having employees come alongside in the journey is something that has always got me excited. And in 2015 and 2016 is when I realized that I probably needed to have some roles in management or sales to help support some of the things that we were going after. And so that was when I brought on first manager, and that person oversaw all of our project work. Um, that was an area of business that he enjoyed, and I was more than happy to focus on the more maintenance side of the business, maintenance and lawn care. And so finally brought somebody in 2015 to lead that department.
What was the revenue breakout or breakdown at that time?
At that time, it was primarily maintenance. I don't have the exact figures, but the majority of our revenue was maintenance, enhancements, lawn care, that kind of thing. And part of what drove us from 500,000 to 1.1 million over the course of a year was taking on that project work.
Gotcha. So that manager really, I mean, that growth really paid for that manager very quickly.
Yeah,
That decision paid off very well.
that's right.
Yeah. So you have mentioned to me before, or you mentioned to me in the prep for today, that you had some early missteps with delegation. So how did those show up? Tell us about that.
Yeah, yeah. Not some of my prouder moments, if I'm being honest, but that first manager that I brought on, I guess I assumed that everybody was like me, and I think this was my first big lesson in self awareness. But I just assumed that this person would do whatever it took to figure things out, just like I did, and that they needed very little direction. And so there was no job description. There was very little discussion about, responsibilities. How do we pay for things? What do you have authority to do? What do you not have authority to do? It was you're over project work, and that's about it. And obviously we talked and would answer questions or whatever. But there was no formality, no clarity around what his responsibilities were versus mine. And so it didn't take long, maybe 6 months, and he came to me and he was pretty frustrated and felt that he was working really, really hard and deserved more money. And I said, sure, that's great. You're obviously promoting additional revenue, so we'll pay you more. But I did not at that point take the opportunity to say, here's the expectations with the increased pay. And so about another year in, and this gentleman wasn't keeping me up to date by how frustrated he was becoming, and just came in one day and said, hey, here's my 2-week notice. Actually, just kidding, I'm on vacation. It's a 4-day notice. And I was just like, okay, well, we're in the middle of quite a few projects that you sold, and I don't know anything about them. And this is really, really challenging. Not what I was expecting. I wish you would have told me that you were frustrated. And we didn't really agree. We didn't really see that eye to eye. I felt like he had committed to the organization almost like an owner would, and yet he did not have any equity in the business. And I was essentially holding him to that expectation without providing any clarity around those expectations. And so we parted ways. The parting did not go well. There's a lot of hard feelings towards each other. And it took me about a year to realize that I was the one responsible for that I was the one who had failed to provide the clarity. I was the one that had failed to have the expectations updated as the company was growing. And so after realizing it and after taking responsibility for it myself, I agreed that we would not have people come into the organization anymore and not have clarity around what their focus is.
I think that a lot of owners, even ones that are in business a lot longer than you have been, always, tend to make that mistake where they think that people will operate the way they do as owners. But I think that what people don't realize is that as owner, you don't necessarily have anybody, you have clients that you report to, or, if you have a partner, maybe that person, but you don't really have anybody else that's gonna give you feedback on what you did right, wrong, or indifferent. And so, when employees are there, they have a boss and they're wondering, am I doing a good job? Am I not doing a good job? Should I take more risk? Should I take less risk? And those are all things that owners don't necessarily worry about, but employees certainly do. And it sounds like you learned that lesson early. So you decided that you were not going to have that repeat again. So what does that look like? What does clarity look like in your business or for your team today?
Yeah. Well, okay, so you asked what it looks like today. I was going to say, I wish I could tell you that I figured that out the next week, but I did not. It took me another couple of years to really feel more comfortable around that. Today, what it looks like, we use, obviously, formal job descriptions. We also use a similar version to an accountability chart that like EOS would use, where we focus on the top 5 to 7 responsibilities and really have some pretty high level responsibilities. And then we have clear KPIs. And so depending on the role, I like to try to keep things as simple as possible. 5 to 7 key responsibilities, 3 to 5 key performance indicators. And so today, as you come into the business, during your onboarding, you're going to be really, really clear on what those are, regardless of the roles.
So you're going to be really clear.
Take typically 30 days. Some of them may take a little bit longer. Maybe a sales role will have, some things that are 60, 90 days. But within the first 30 days, we want to make sure that each part of the team, they're really, really clear on what they're accountable for.
So each role has 3 to 5 key responsibilities, 3 to 5 key results, you said?
That's
KPIs
correct.
or key results.
Yep.
So how long in pages is your typical job description, for example?
I like for them to stay relatively simple. So a page and a half tops. I'd be hard pressed to have one longer than a 1-page document.
I think about the 80-20 rule. When you look at a job description that's 3 or 4 pages long, people, focus on all those things. It's very hard to really understand where to focus and how to have an impact. And so when you do what you're doing, which is provide, basically thinking the 80-20, what's the 20% of what they're going to do that's going to drive 80% of the results? That's the way I like to look at it. And I think that's what you're doing by shortening it up and giving them really what to focus on that actually matters.
Yeah, and I think it's also easy to focus on really specific tasks instead of maybe outcomes, or taking that up a level and saying, well, right now we define our task as being done this way. Well, what ultimately do we need to get done? Can we kind of go up a level on that and be a little bit more inclusive, so I don't have to list out every single task? And then when that task or the process to completing that task might change, then I constantly have to update that. And so if you can just kind of take a step back from the specific thing you need done and go a little bit higher level with it, I think that can help create more clarity.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you said that this situation was kind of your first lesson in self-awareness. Tell us about your second.
My second or my biggest?
Let's go with your biggest.
Yeah. I wish I could say I learned things the easy way. Sometimes I got to get hit over the head with it a couple times to really learn it. So probably the most memorable self-awareness moment for me was when I first joined the peer group. And, as a young guy, I don't know, I was probably in my early 30s, first joined the peer group. I wasn't sure what to expect. And all of a sudden you're around a bunch of peers, most of them older than me, with more mature businesses. For me, I kind of had this idea that, like, I needed to prove that I deserved to be in the room. And so I wanted to come across as confident in what I was talking about and that sort of thing. And we go through the 2 or 3 days of work that we're doing, the social events, all that stuff. And we get to the end of the meeting, and I don't know if we do this anymore, but I was asked to leave the room while the other members discussed whether or not I was a good fit. And I was like, oh, that's easy. I'm a great guy. Everybody knows that. And this won't be that difficult. Well, they were talking in there for a while. And I remember getting a little nervous after about 10 or 15 minutes, like, oh man, I might not make the cut. Like, what's going on? And so, they may have been goofing off and talking about something else the entire time, but they asked me to come back in, and they said, Nate seemed like a great guy and all that stuff. But a lot of us experienced you as being very arrogant and defensive. And so if you're going to be part of this group, that's something that you're going to need to work on. And you've got to commit to us that you're going to get some help with that you're going to grow in that area. And I don't know if I could really describe how shocked I was to receive that feedback. I mean, it set me back so much, just kind of mentally, like, what happened that other people experienced me that way. And so at the moment, I didn't know how to feel about it. Today, I'm very grateful for that experience because it allowed me to go down this journey of self-awareness. And when I say self-awareness, I don't mean what do I know about myself, but how are other people experiencing my interactions. And if you're listening to this on audio, you may not see what I look like, but I've got a shaved head and a beard, and most people experience me as a pretty intense guy. And if I'm not intentionally smiling, I look like I'm upset or angry, that kind of thing. And those are just things that I was not paying attention to at the time. And so I just had to do a lot of work in learning about reading how other people were interpreting my body language, my tonality, and because inside my heart, I'm a super nice guy. And I think those who get to know me experience me that way. But first impressions go a long way, and if people's first impressions of me are that I'm being arrogant or defensive, then it's probably going to take a while to overcome those first impressions. And that really sets back the business. It sets me back as a leader, whether it's a peer, whether it's a direct report, or somebody or a potential client. Well, that could really harm the business. And so it was very, very important for me to learn that lesson early on.
So, for a new member going into one of our peer groups, why don't you give some advice going into that first meeting to maybe avoid that 15 minutes of you sitting in the lobby sweating, trying to figure out if you're going to be welcome back or not?
Well, I think it's important just to be vulnerable, to not act like you have it all together. And there's an element of confidence that we all as entrepreneurs need to have, but we probably shouldn't engage something like a peer group if the purpose is not to learn and to get better. And in order to learn and get better, you've got to reveal your failures, which is a little scary to do sometimes, but you've got to be vulnerable and share the things that you're struggling with. And so my advice to others who may be considering it, I'd say, I don't know that there's a better mirror out there for you to learn from than a peer group, because these are people who don't really owe you anything. Certainly everybody wants to get benefit out of it, but the level of care and investment that you'll get from people who don't really owe you anything, in my experience, is completely and totally unmatched, as long as you're willing to be open and vulnerable. If you try to engage something like this, thinking you have it all together, I don't know that it's going to go super well for you.
So, taking that feedback from the group, you said you realized that you have to really be intentional with your body language and your tone. And so I'm imagining you took that and you brought that same mindset back into your personal life, your professional life, within your business. What results did you see when you started being intentional about all that? How did that change your business and your relationships or your life?
Yeah. Again, I wish I could say I got it all figured out, but the reality is I still have to work on it every single day. And my wife's a good reminder that sometimes I'm not applying it as well in my personal life as I probably should be. She'll sometimes say things, and I need to hear this, so I'm not complaining, but she'll say things like, I wish you could see your face when you're saying what you're saying. I don't know that you mean to look this way, look like you're upset when you're talking like this, but that's the way I'm experiencing it. Okay, all right, I got to step back. You got to remember to smile. Got to remember to say things as simple as, I'm not upset or I'm not angry. This is just what I'm experiencing, or this is just what I'm feeling about the thing that I need to bring up to you. And it's a lot about for me, it's a lot about clarifying my intent, clarifying my feelings as I engage in a conversation, so that people aren't guessing and maybe just kind of reading my body language the wrong way. As far as bringing it back into the business, man, it was probably a good 12 months of constantly asking people for feedback. How were they experiencing me? Which was just a whole new world. As an entrepreneur who's pretty confident, I was not used to getting feedback from people, especially from people who reported to me. And so what I had to do was just create an environment where people were safe for people to give me feedback. And that only happened through consistent and constant uh, gentle prodding for, hey, when I said this, what did you hear when I said this? How did that come across to you? That kind of thing. And I had to do this with friends, peers, with family members, and I still have to do it from time to time. But today, I feel like I have a little better understanding of it.
Do you think that there's a key, like what's the key to success to getting feedback from direct reports? Because giving your boss feedback is not always easy. People might tend to water it down because they're afraid to insult you, or obviously you sign their paychecks and give that authority. So what do you think the key is there? What tips do you give people to get honest, raw feedback from their people?
Well, I don't know that it's fair to expect someone to feel comfortable giving you honest feedback the first time you ask for it. I think it's important to ask for specific feedback about a specific thing early on until that other person feels safe and comfortable being very honest with you. And even today, I still have to say things like, hey, I'm just looking for feedback. I really want you to tell me how you experienced this or how this went, because I'm looking to grow and I'm looking to get better. And if I never get feedback, it's going to be hard for me to grow and to get better. And so in that moment, I'm revealing some vulnerability, which is I need their feedback for me to continue to grow and get better. And I think everyone can relate with that. Anybody who's desiring to be successful ultimately wants to grow and get better. And so I think that becomes relatable. But I think it's super, super important that you be patient. If you're kind of going on this journey, you be patient and not expect other people to just, out with all of it. You have to really take the time to make them feel safe and comfortable offering that feedback.
And your response to that feedback is critical to building that safety.
That's right.
What's your typical response? When you ask for feedback, what's your typical response?
When I am asked for feedback?
When you ask for feedback from somebody, they say, Nate, this is how I experienced you. You could have been whatever, nicer, you came across angry, or you were really short, and whatever the case is, what's your go-to response to ensure that you build on that safety?
The first thing I say, and I recommend others saying, is thank you. Because it's brave to do that. You can help someone feel safe and comfortable just by genuinely thanking them. It doesn't matter whether or not you agree with them. The reality is that they were being brave and giving that feedback. So just say thank you for that. And then often you can, if you want clarification or you want to go into it more, you can say, hey, I'm genuinely curious. When you said this, what did that mean? Again, I just want to learn. I just want to grow. So thank you for the feedback. And can you tell me more about this specific thing?
And how do you handle it if you don't agree?
I'll just say, thank you for the feedback. Is there anything more you'd like to say? Until they don't have anything further to say. And I say, thank you for the time.
All right.
If it's a very close peer, very close trusted person, I may get into a debate or discussion about that. What I've learned that has to be the minority. It cannot be the majority. Otherwise, you break down that safety.
Sure. So, sounds like, being in the peer group helped you with your self-awareness, your leadership skills. What else did you gain from the leadership that's helped on your journey to your $10.5 million budget this year?
Man, we've been part of the peer group for I think 6 years now, And I'm very thankful to be in a strong group with strong relationships, in a trio with some very strong relationships. I'd say they're my friends as well as peers. And I don't know that there's a significant decision or move that we have made in our business without getting advice from peers, whether that's in the early days, learning how to build a legitimate budget, learning how to understand the balance sheet, learning how to have tough accountability conversations with leaders or salespeople in the business. I can't think of a significant thing that we've done in the business that didn't come before the peer group, especially the trio group, which is kind of just a smaller group of 3 or 4 of us that talk on a regular basis. And so we've navigated all kinds of things, from having to let somebody go, to finding out that the key person decided to leave the business, to building sales commission structures, to making a major acquisition that doubled the size of the business. Those are all things that it's impossible to say whether I would have done them with or without the peer group, but with the help of the peer group, made them way less painful than they would have otherwise been.
And so you mentioned budgets, and you mentioned another report, and you said that learning financial literacy has been a critical part of building your business. So tell me a little about that journey.
Yeah, I will never forget the beginning of this journey, because I was reading a landscape trade magazine. I can't remember if it was Lawn and Landscape or Landscape Management, but I was reading a trade magazine. There was an article in there about knowing your margins, and it was talking about the different types of margins and the percentages and all that stuff. And this is probably 2015 or 2016, and I remember looking at that and thinking, I should probably learn more about this. And I turned the page and went on to the article about the fancy new mower or blower or whatever it was. And I'll never forget the moment that I decided to defer learning something that my brain knew, my body knew I needed to engage. And I regret that moment. Obviously, it sticks out, so it's a learning thing for me. But all I was doing was deciding to experience more pain before really wrapping my head around that. And so the peer group was a big part of me learning my numbers. The first time I had to fill out a rolling budget, I needed a ton of help understanding what all these different benchmarks were, what all these categories were. My P&L, I had a P&L, but it wasn't in line with the way that we format the benchmarks in the rolling budget. Today, that's like the back of my hand. But it was a series of just asking a lot of questions. I'm sure I probably felt like I was asking dumb questions, but I didn't know. And so I just had to keep asking questions. And there were also 2 or 3 books that really helped me with that journey of growing in financial literacy.
Simple Numbers 2.0, I think, is one of them. We've talked about that one.
That's correct. There's a version 1, Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits by Greg Crabtree, and then he has a follow-up book to that, Simple Numbers 2.0. And then for one of the peer group meetings, the required reading was The Ultimate Blueprint to an Insanely Successful Business by Cunningham, I think. Keith Cunningham, if I'm not mistaken. And I think I had to read that book 2 or 3 times to really understand it. But by the end of reading it, felt like I knew I was much more confident in my financial literacy at that point.
What role does that financial competency play in the clarity that you've created in your business?
If you're not really trying to grow your business, I think it's important for everybody to know their numbers, but if you don't really want to grow your business, perhaps it's not the number one thing to work on. I don't know. You have to make that decision for your own business. But for me and for Precision, it's really, really hard to know what moves to make, what decisions to make without financial clarity. One of my coaches says it's like being in the middle of New York City and your GPS doesn't work. And you're trying to go from one side of the city to another side of the city. You don't know which direction to go. You might walk a block one direction and you might be further from your goal. If your GPS doesn't work, how are you ever going to get moving in the direction of your destination? And I think the same thing is true for financial literacy. If you don't know what direction to move in, what decision to make, what thing to change, how are you ever going to get to the destination that you desire to be at?
So for someone that's, maybe 10 years behind you, what are the top 3 KPIs or metrics that you would recommend to start with?
Obviously, you've got to measure revenue. I'd measure gross margin, and I'd measure net profit. Those are the top 3 that I'd focus on. Those are very, very simple, and it doesn't really matter what format you decide to choose, whether it's a profit first or simple numbers or whatever format. Those are things that you have to have for every P&L. And if you don't understand those first 3 numbers and the relationship to each other, it's going to be really, really hard to advance from there.
Albert Einstein is credited with a quote where it's something along the lines of not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So is there anything that you've counted in the past that you realized, this isn't worth counting, actually. We should focus on other things?
So many things. I wish I could think of most of them at the moment. I'm kind of a forward thinker, so I've probably moved on mentally from a lot of those things, but we've, in our pursuit of getting the right KPIs in place, we've measured just about anything in the business that you can measure. And just over time and through trying and failing, we've, and we still will adapt to things that we choose to focus on. And I agree with the quote that not everything's worth counting, and some of the things that are worth counting can't be counted. Things like culture, you can't count that. Sure, you can count employee retention, but is that truly an indicator of culture? I don't know that you can say. Surely it influences it, but it's not the ultimate indicator of a healthy culture. And so, I agree with that.
I think that sometimes, especially if you're talking about that retention, like we just spoke about, and whether it's a direct result of culture, I think the key to, using any kind of KPI or metric is really just being very aware of what's actually driving that, and being open to understanding that it might not be because of one thing, but rather another, or even in spite of something.
Yes.
So you mentioned acquisitions a little while ago, and so how many acquisitions are you on now?
I believe we've done 5 or 6 over the course of the business.
5 or 6 acquisitions, and so you said you figured it out as you went. Walk us through, maybe your most recent acquisition story and how you applied some of the lessons that you've gained along the way.
Yeah, the most recent one was our largest acquisition by far. All the others paled in comparison. And I felt comfortable going after this opportunity because of the lessons I had learned on the much smaller ones. Some of the very, very small acquisitions along the way helped me know that at the end of the day, it's about that owner's or that founder's vision, their emotions, their readiness to move on, their desires, their interests. There was one acquisition we did years ago where the founder wanted to stay very, very engaged in the industry. And so having the right role for them to step into inside Precision was super, super important. And to him, getting the top valuation for his business was the most important thing. And so I had to find a way to make that work and to integrate the business. Fast forward from that a year or two, there was another founder who he was ready to leave the industry. Young guy, but he was just going to pursue a different industry. And those two businesses were similar size, but he was willing to he wanted to exit right away. And so what we invested in that versus the prior was a small percentage. I want to say it was maybe 20%. Similar size clients, similar size revenue for only 20% of the investment of the first. And so ultimately understanding the owner's interests and desires are critical to a successful acquisition. And what I learned is that even on a much larger scale, that's not much different. And so when we were presented with this opportunity to essentially double the size of the business, I just went back to that, and we just had some heart-to-heart conversations. Like, what do you want to see? You know, what's the most important thing for you at the end of the day? Obviously, you've got a price on it, but what's the most important thing for you? And the most important thing for him was, yes, he understood the value of his business, but he wanted someone to carry his legacy into the future. He did not want to see this run by somebody who didn't know what they were doing. He did not want to see it get liquidated. It was very, very important for him to still be able to see the business operating in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years. And so by having a dialogue around that, we were able to make a very successful acquisition and transfer the business. Still had its challenges. As an owner, letting go of the reins and realizing you're no longer critical to the ongoing operations of the business is a hard thing to get over. But because I knew what his interests were, we were able to just keep pointing back to that and saying, hey, your business has a future. Your key staff, they have a future. And so I guess that's kind of the main thing I've learned. Obviously, there's all kinds of other things. There's the financial part, there's the strategy part, there's the integration of the cultures, integration of the people, the systems, all that stuff. That's part of it. But I think it's critical to just sit down and have a heart-to-heart conversation between owners.
Just saying, have that heart-to-heart conversation, probably more than one, right? Mm-hmm. And get clear on their objectives. And that's going to drive how you structure the deal. And then if they're still involved after you close and there are some challenges, keep bringing them back to that objective that they stated at the beginning and showing that you're making progress or you're headed towards that objective.
Yep. Yeah, this particular seller on the most recent acquisition, the large one, he the way he liked to communicate to me was, after he had gone home that night and seen all the things I had done different, he would send me a really long text, possibly an email, but it's usually a text. Here's all the things that I saw. I would do it this way. I think you need to do it this way, etc. And I just was not about that. What I wanted to say was, sorry, buddy, you sold the business. If I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. I did not ever say that. What I ended up doing is saying, hey, you know what? I think it's super, super important that we can hear each other out and I can continue to learn from you during this transition. And I want you to have the confidence that I care about these things. I'm probably going to handle some things different than you do, but I want you to know I care about them and I value your feedback. So every other week, we're going to go to lunch and you're going to bring to me all the things that you're seeing that should be different. And I'm just going to listen to you. I'm going to ask you questions, clarify, and I may or may not decide to do something with it, but I want you to feel heard. And at the end of the day, I do need to learn some things from your years of experience. And if we hadn't done that, there's no way we would have seen out the predetermined amount of time that he was going to stay out of the business.
That sounds like a really successful strategy. And I hear in what you just said, I hear a lot of what you learned from from your peer group experience and your self-awareness journey that we talked about earlier. So I can see how that really helped you be successful in this acquisition. When it comes to acquisitions, what would you not do again?
Well, I would not do. I would not buy a business. Well, and I haven't, but I would not buy a business that doesn't add some sort of value to your own business. And what I mean by that is, like, we're a residential business, and if the client base for this potential acquisition is all commercial, it's not really adding value to a business that already has synergy. So I would just stay focused on what you as a business have decided to stay focused on, and not stray too far from that. Unless, of course, your decision is to advance in commercial, because that's a strategic value to your business, in which case you should absolutely go after it. But I would recommend asking the key people on that business to stay on, help you learn the pieces of that business that are important to learn. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but if you want to clarify, if I haven't answered something that you want to clarify, just let me know.
No, it's good, but I think it's a good segue into another question I have, which is, you've specified that Precision's focus is high-end residential, right? And so you just said you were talking about if an acquisition opportunity comes up and it's not within that focus, if it's not high-end residential, you would essentially say no, right? And so when you're looking at customers, right, or if a client comes to you, or if one of your employees sees an opportunity that isn't in the high-end residential market, how do you say no to something that's the wrong fit?
Again, I wish I could say this is really easy. The reality is, even I, from time to time, will entertain something that's outside of our core focus. Usually the team's disciplined enough to keep us all pointing in the same direction. And every now and then you say yes to an opportunity that's kind of on the fringe of your target, because you're just kind of curious, hey, could this lead to an opportunity that we're not taking advantage of? And so I think that's the key, is having a team that is very, very clear on what your target is, and allowing them the freedom to say, hey, this feels like it's outside of our target. Probably need to pass on this opportunity, unless we as a business are going to change our strategy, which feels like something we should not make a decision around just on our dime. We should probably think this through a little bit more closely. And as your business grows, and like in our case, we have a sales team. Of course, those sales staff feel some pressure to meet their goals. I think any successful sales team does feel pressure to meet their goals. And so for them, it's tempting to entertain opportunities outside of our focus. And that's where, the sales leader, the sales team, and I as the CEO, it's important to continually point them back to our vision and the fact that all of our processes and all of our people are built around serving this target client.
So you just brought up the goals of a sales leader, and I remember not too long ago you were in the role of a sales leader and the CEO. I think now you're solely CEO position, but not too long ago you were sales leader and CEO. So what were the challenges in holding both those seats, and how do you overcome that?
Ooh, good question. I'll go ahead and say that was probably one of the hardest personal things in the business that I had to let go of, because I enjoy sales, I enjoy sales strategy, I enjoy leading salespeople. They're smart, they're engaged, they care, they're compensated well, so there's just a high amount of buy-in from good salespeople, and I really, really enjoyed that. But being in both seats created some other conflict in the business. So where maybe another department director needed to have conflict with the sales leader, they didn't feel as comfortable maybe holding me accountable because I was also their boss. And so I didn't find this out until later, but there were some sales culture things that were kind of being swept under the rug because I was also the sales leader. And so we weren't having as transparent a conversation around some of those things as we should have been able to have. And so really grateful that I didn't hold on to that for super long, because that allowed us to really open up conversations that we need to be having there. I also realized after letting go of that role that I was not giving it the attention that it deserved, because, I don't know, 50, 60% of my time had to be focused on the CEO role. And that meant that maybe 40% of my time was going to the sales leader role, and the time we had 4 salespeople. Well, tops, that meant they were getting 5 or 10% of my time, and some of them were new. And so that's just not enough time for them to get acclimated to the business the right way, to support them. And we saw our sales team flourish once I decided to move out of that role and got a strong sales leader in place.
I think that's a really strong lesson, or there's 2 really strong lessons there. One is more common, which is, a lot of the times owners tend to hold on to roles for too long because they either think that they're the only one that can do it, or they think that nobody can do it as well as they can. And they, you hear stories all the time, I think all the time, or certainly I do, about once they get somebody else in that role, they realize, oh my God, somebody can do it actually so much better than me. But I think the second lesson there that you just taught us is there's also huge value in understanding that when the owner is holding one of these functional roles, it's a dynamic which is difficult to get full transparency, I think you said, and really get the team working as efficiently as they can, or as well as they can. And once you put somebody else in that role, it really opens that up. And so it's not just that person being able to do the job better than the CEO or the owner did, but also the team overall working better without the CEO in that role.
Yeah, and just simply put, at the time I had 11 direct reports. Well, I don't know that it's a good idea for a CEO to have 11 direct reports. The one-on-ones, the weekly meetings as a department, etc., that's getting spread pretty thin. And so, again, for those who are out there and maybe in similar positions or considering similar moves, how much more value can your different teams have when there's a dedicated leader rather than one leader trying to do 2 things?
So at that time you had 11 direct reports. How many direct reports do you have now?
6.
6 direct reports. And what are those roles? Just list them off.
So there is a director of finance, director of sales and marketing, director of landscape construction, director of maintenance, director of lawn care, irrigation, and then there's a fractional COO.
So in the next evolution of precision landscape management, how many direct reports do you have?
There will probably be 2 or 3.
What roles do you think those are that you would keep?
Probably keep the sales as a direct report. Probably keep operations like a COO as a direct report. Probably keep the CFO or director of finance as a direct report.
Okay. So let's talk about your brand promise. You said your brand promise is reliability, responsiveness, and doing things the right way. How does that show up in the day-to-day for your team?
Great question. And again, I'll say I wish we were perfect on this all the time. The good news is it's something we talk about relatively frequently as a leadership team and as our departmental teams that, because you've got the core values, which is for us, it's an internal thing. This is how we measure up ourselves and say, how are we doing according to these things? The brand promise is what we are telling clients is unique about us. And so one of the things that I identified early on in the high-end residential space is that our customers or our leads, our prospects at the time were saying, well, I hired this company, they did great for a month or two, and then they stopped showing up, or they show up every other week. We're kind of an option for this other company, and we want to be a priority for this company. And so I identified very early on, it's really not that difficult to keep showing up when you say you're going to keep showing up. And so for us, just practically speaking inside the business, like there's no question, are we going to keep showing up every week for our maintenance clients? Are we going to do our lawn care rounds when we say we're going to do our lawn care rounds? Like that is not a debate. That is not a conversation. It just happens. We're there weekly. You can count on us. And so that reliable part was key. Responsiveness, as we all know, it's hard to get businesses to communicate back, especially small trades businesses. And again, was just hearing that frustration and that pain from prospects as we were communicating with them. And so, for us, it was like, well, how hard is it to just pick up the phone and communicate? And I'd say that's the one we struggle with the most. With technology.
What's the standard? Do you have a standard in which people are supposed to get back to clients? And what is it?
Yeah, it used to be 48 hours back before the age of Amazon and, getting things immediately. 48 hours was an acceptable time to get back to a client. Now it's 24 hours. And even some clients are like, are you kidding me? You didn't call me back within an hour or two? And it's like, well, you're not our only client. So, yeah, the standard is 24 hours. And from time to time, we find out we've not upheld that standard. So we've got to have a conversation and say, why is this so important to us? This is literally our brand promise. When we engage with this customer, we told them that this is what was unique about us, and you're failing that standard. So you're going to need to not fail that standard. You're going to need to uphold it. And it's a reminder that this is critical to us and the success and reputation of our business.
Is there anything or any things, you might have a couple, where you had a conversation, hey, you didn't get back to this client in 24 hours, this is our standard, and the person says, well, this is why, and you go, oh, wow, good point. I understand now, but we still want to get back to people within 24 hours, so we have to do something about that. Like what I guess what I'm asking, or what are 1 to 3 things that have gotten in the way in the past that you were able to make a difference on?
Yeah. So there's some real practical challenges to that, such as maybe a team member was hospitalized. Unfortunately, we had a salesperson last week who ended up in the hospital for an unforeseen circumstance. She's okay, but that created challenges for, are we going to communicate in a timely manner? And for situations like that, you just have to be understanding. And as you find out, hey, who does this person need to communicate with? Can we look at their calendar? Can we see what meetings they may have had? Can we reach out to them and say, hey, this is going on? Things are going to get rescheduled. There are some other things such as, I couldn't get them an answer. And so I was keeping their email as unread until I could get them an answer. And to that we say, hey, that's great. I understand. You need to reply to that email and say, hey, I'm working on this. I'll get back to you in a day, 2 days, 3 days, but I am working on this. Because if you don't acknowledge their communication, the expectation is that they are getting ignored. And that's just not an acceptable thing. So it takes nothing, 15 seconds to say, I'm working on this. I will get back to you in 2 or 3 days. And then you just got to make sure you get back to them in 2 or 3 days.
And so the third brand promise was doing things the right way.
That's correct. Again, one of the things we kept hearing in the high-end residential space is, I hired XYZ company, and they came out and they did work, but maybe they didn't finish their work. Maybe they started the job and left. Maybe they think they finished the job, but they took a bunch of shortcuts along the way, and so this work is having to be redone. And so, again, I was just listening to our customers' most common concerns and saying, if we can build a business that meets these 3 things, there will be demand for us forever. And we built these 3 uniques, and it's been 6 or 7 years. And I am amazed at how they continually stay at the forefront of what clients demand from trade service partners, to consistently show up and to show up when they say they're going to show up, to communicate in a timely and effective way, and to do things the right way. And there's times we have to redo things because we took a shortcut, didn't do it the right way. And our standard is you make it right. No questions. And so of course we're not perfect at all of these things, but I'm just amazed how they continue to be very, very relevant in this business.
What's the number one thing you do that really, that most impacts the team driving these 3 brand promises through their actions?
So what do I do as a leader to make sure that these stay front and center?
As a leader or as a team?
I think we have a good dialogue amongst the leadership team to make sure that we know what is most important. Like what are the issues that are coming up as it pertains to one of these things? Hey, I've noticed twice now that this person didn't get back to this person in a timely manner. Hey, I've noticed twice now that we said we were going to show up and perform a punch list at a project, and we pushed it off again. And the leadership team is very, very aware that these are our brand promises and very willing to have some conflict and conversation when they perceive that these are not being upheld somewhere in the business. And so that's, kind of back to some of that EOS cadence of every 90 days, getting in front of the team and saying, these are our standards. This is our focus. This is our core values. This is our brand promise. And so when you're saying it over and over every 90 days in front of the whole team, at some point, if you're not upholding that, it just comes across as hypocritical.
So you're a soccer fan and a Formula One fan. What's something from soccer or racing that you apply to business?
One quick thing. So a lot of businesses will say, well, we're a family business. And, I have family that work in the business with me. But I've noticed that parallel breaks down at some point. You can't fire family members, right? If someone was born into your family, they're in your family. Sure, you could disown a family member, but you cannot change their DNA. And so I think team is something that parallels very, very well to business. As a team, you're constantly looking for A players. A players and B players want to play with other A and B players because it makes them better. they're very, very comfortable with competing with each other and competing with other people, other teams, other competitors to constantly be better. So I think that parallels way better to business than perhaps family. And I'm not trying to criticize anyone else who chooses to use the family analogy. I think there's some value in it in other areas, but for me, observing elite teams in soccer or in Formula One, it's about them being unified under a mission, under clear goals, under clear roles, and constantly pushing towards what that team is trying to accomplish. And if I didn't say a team name, you could have imagined I was talking about a business when I said that.
Last question, Nate. What would you tell yourself 10 years ago? What's the biggest tip you'd give yourself of 10 years ago?
Good question. I have a hard time being too hard on myself for not knowing what I didn't know. I think the only thing I could tell myself is ask more questions sooner, and don't flip the page in the magazine and ignore learning about numbers.
Don't ignore numbers.
That's right. If it makes you uncomfortable, you probably need to lean into it. In one of the first peer group meetings, I don't think it was the first one, but in one of the first peer group meetings I ever went to, I'll give a shout out to Seth from Knoxville. He said, you need to run to your weaknesses. And it was the first time I had heard that. And I got home from that meeting and I wrote it on my whiteboard, and it stayed up there for probably 2 or 3 years. Run to your weaknesses. And I needed that daily reminder quite often during that time frame, because it was easy for me to want to say, well, that's an area I'm uncomfortable with. I'm just going to sweep it under the rug and keep on moving. But that was a very poignant phrase for a period of time, to run to my weakness, to not turn the page in the magazine and pay attention to the mower when I really needed to pay attention to the margins.
Nate Moses, Precision Landscape Management, Greenville, South Carolina. Thank you, Nate, for joining us.
It was a pleasure.